Doom is known as a game about shooting demons, but with the addition of the shield and melee weapons, can you beat Doom the Dark Ages without any guns?
Stop responding.
So right away, I wanted to talk about the difficulty choices. First of all, for these sliders, I decided to go with pretty much completely default slider options for the difficulty I chose, and I went with Ultra Violence for the difficulty setting. This is my second run of the game ever, so I didn't think I was quite ready to play on Nightmare yet. But later on, I'll definitely be going after Ultra Nightmare, and I'll make sure to make a video about that for you guys as well. That said, even though I'm not playing on Nightmare, this game is plenty hard without guns. You'll see what I mean as we get later into the run. And right away, we start off by shooting enemies? That can't be right. So I restarted the run. I'm really glad I caught this early. And in the future, whenever I did accidentally shoot my gun, I would always immediately reload a checkpoint, and I'll show you guys when I do it. And this time I used the shield bash to take out the enemies in the beginning, which is currently our only way of dealing damage. However, we'll get some more options as we progress through the game. The shield bash is pretty bad at doing damage to bigger demons, but it is able to one-shot the fodder demons, and it also has a very large splash radius, so it's pretty good in this starting area where we're only dealing with fodder demons anyway. This part of the game isn't really that hard, but things definitely ramp up as we get farther into the game, so I'm probably going to skim through this level a little bit. Once we bash through this wall, we're introduced to our first heavy demon. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know what he's called, but since he's not a fodder demon, he takes like a bajillion bashes to kill, and this is literally our only way of dealing damage, so I'm gonna be here for quite a while. So yeah, that was 500% sped up footage for killing one of the most basic heavy demons in the game. Off to a good start. Oh yeah, and here's two more. Fuck you, that's why. I'm not so sure about that, pal. So once we get down here, we're finally given another weapon we can use, and that is the Power Fist. And this actually is a big part of our run, as it is our top damage source for most of the game. There are 3 melee weapons in this game, and we'll go over them all in detail as we get them, but this is essentially the single target damage choice, which is honestly the best one we could get, so we'll be trying to upgrade this baby as soon as we can. If you guys don't know, the way the fist works is you can hit melee combos just by chaining hits on the same enemy, and whenever you do the kick attack, it does a ridiculous amount of damage, and it's the third hit in the combo. You also gain back melee charges whenever you parry attacks, or you just get them over time. But as you can see here, now that we have the Power Fist, we are able to do actual damage to heavy demons, and we don't have to sit there and smash them with our shield for minutes at a time anymore. That being said, our melee attack cooldown is quite a problem right now, because not a lot of the enemies that we're facing currently have a lot of parryable attacks. Later in the game, especially once we start getting melee enemies, we get parryable attacks all the time, which is going to give us a really good source of melee energy. So you'll see occasionally I have to draw out fights for really long periods of time to let my melees recharge so that way I can do damage to the enemies. And this is the big fight in this level, and we have to face off against 2 of these Boar Rider enemy types. These guys have a ton of health, and the main issue is that they stop doing parryable attacks once you knock the guy off the top, so I end up having to spend a really long time killing them if I run out of melee charges for them. And since none of their attacks are parryable, they tend to hit me a lot as well. But with a whole lot more fighting done, we're ready to finish off the level. I don't like where this is going. So yeah, you can't beat this game without ever shooting any gun, because there are required sections like this that make you use the turret, and there's just no way around them. If you don't shoot the enemies, they'll just kill you, and there's nothing you can do about it. The level just simply won't progress unless you kill everything. So no, you can't beat Doom the Dark Age without ever shooting a gun. But what if we try to beat Doom the Dark Ages without ever expending any ammo? Since this gun does have infinite ammo, does it really count as shooting a gun? Let's just cope and keep going. Having moved on to the next level, we are immediately introduced to our next weapon, and that is the chainsaw for our shield. And it is absolutely instrumental for our run because it's the best way to kill Flutter quickly and get our health back whenever we're low on health. And now that we have the shield saw, we actually have a somewhat complete kit. That being said, we're nowhere near where we're going to be at the end of the game because we still don't have any upgrades, but fortunately this level introduces us to gold and the upgrade station. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But for now, I was just taking off the introductory fight, which as you could see is already going much faster than the last level did. So these shield guys prove to be a bit of a problem for us, because metal armor is super resistant to most forms of damage, unless you have a specific weapon that can do extra damage to the armor, which in our case is only going to be the Flail. So we have to take a ton of damage punching on the shield, just to get them hot enough to be able to break it with our buzzsaw. That being said, I did find a little trick for taking them out a little bit later in the game, but by then it was less important because we were more powerful anyway. Either way, it's not the end of the world, since those guys are kind of intended to just be free armor anyway. And you'll see right there, I accidentally shot my gun trying to do a shield bash, but fortunately the shield bash killed the guy I was targeting, so I didn't hit anything with it, so I was okay with it. Later on, I do accidentally hit stuff whenever I shoot, and I end up resetting the checkpoint whenever I do that, but just because I didn't hit anything there, I didn't have a problem with it. And here is a great example of the shield guys being really annoying. There's also a bigger form of these that have guns and typically just show up on their own, and they're even worse for us because they absolutely shred us. But this part isn't too bad since they're on their own, and there's no other demons shooting us in the ass while we're trying to deal with them. And once we climb up here, we're introduced to the Hell Knight. And these guys are actually pretty helpful for the run because they spam parryable attacks constantly, which is a great source for us to get our melees back. That being said, this is the first time I'm fighting one, and so I wasn't totally sure how to take it on, but later on I would actually preserve them just to get more melee charges for the other enemies that don't do as many parryable attacks. I also learned later that you have to keep parrying until you make them stun to effectively take them out with the melees, or else they'll just knock your shit while you're doing it. You can also just throw the buzzsaw on them, and that'll stun them as well and let you do your melees too. And once we make it to the first upgrade station of the game, I spent some time going through the upgrades I could do. I have the choice between either the shield or our melee right now, and I decided to go with the shield, mainly because they're about to introduce to us energy shield enemies, and they are pretty annoying if you don't have the shield upgrade that lets it bounce off of energy shields. This is the next big fight after we get our upgrade to our shield, and unfortunately I still don't have the one that lets it bounce between energy shields, so we have to take these guys out one at a time. Throwing the shield is literally the only way to take on the energy shields for us. We have no other way of damaging them. You'll also see a pretty common occurrence throughout the run is me getting to low health. This tends to happen because our entire playstyle is revolving around melee only, so I have to be in the faces of demons constantly, and pretty much anytime a demon isn't staggered, if I try to damage them with melee, they're going to smack the shit out of me while I'm doing it. One thing I will point out is that the parries do pretty good damage against the enemies that have like projectile attacks that you're bouncing. Like these stun skin imps actually turn into projectiles and die when you parry them, and those projectiles go and hit other enemies, which is super useful. Just like you saw there, parrying that stone imp actually did enough damage to get the Hell Knight into a finishable state, and that let me have my melees for this guy instead of having to charge up even more. Later on in the game, we'll also get a rune which is going to let us do even more damage whenever we do a parry, but for a while we're stuck with just the base parry. Now we've gone and grabbed the plasma rifle, which is the intended way for you to be able to take out energy shields quickly, and along with that we are introduced to, I believe, our first Mancubus. These guys are super annoying because in higher difficulty, their projectile attacks don't have any parryable projectiles, so the only way to gain melee charges off of them is to hope that you can parry their melee attack, which is a very difficult thing to parry, and there's also a chance that they just shoot you with a flamethrower instead, which is also not parryable. Pretty much the only way for us to counter them is to hit them with the buzzsaw, and then go in and do a triple melee hit. And you'll see a great example of them being annoying right here, where I don't have any melee charges yet, so I don't have anything to do real damage to him, but I try to do a parry on his melee and he just kind of trolls me. But eventually I get my 3 melees back, and I'm ready to take him down now. And now, a little bit later on the level, I've grabbed some more gold and we have yet another upgrade station. I decided to pick up another upgrade while we're here, But while we're waiting around, I thought I would point out to you guys that I am getting a lot of the gold and collectibles early on in the levels. This is pretty common whenever it comes to running hard difficulties or challenge runs in Doom. Typically, if you can, it's best to get as powerful as you can early on, and then you start rushing through the levels a little bit faster once you get into the late game, and you already have all the upgrades you want. Also, since we have a little bit of downtime, if you guys are enjoying the video, make sure you subscribe, like, comment, all that. It's much appreciated, especially since I'm trying to change topics on my channel, and it can be a little bit unforgiving to do that. Anyway, here's some more combat now with the new shield upgrade. Enjoy! And with that mission done, we're now on to Barrier Core, which is a mech level. And mech levels play exactly the same as they do without the challenge. There is also a required part where you're forced to use a minigun, but similar to the turret section, that's going to fall under the not my guns clause, because realistically it's not me shooting the gun, it's the mech shooting the gun, right? So it's totally different. So yeah, we're just going to skip over any of the dragon and mech levels, because they're both just required sections that don't really add much to the game. They're honestly really boring, so I don't even want to try to edit them. The only thing really of note is that in the dragon levels, I don't chase and shoot the flying guys, because obviously that is optional shooting, and we don't want to do any of that. I only did the required shooting, which is basically the right click, like, dodging minigame that is attached to literally everything when fighting the dragon. And another reason I'm skipping these is just because this already took me like 8 or 9 hours to complete the entire story with no guns. And on top of that, I'm expecting this to be a very lengthy video, so anything I can cut out that's not interesting, I'm definitely going to. If you played through the full game, you'll probably know I'm cutting quite a bit of stuff out, but that's just to try to keep the video as short as reasonable, because this game is super long, clocking in at 22 missions. So after we pick up the skull gun, which we will promptly be ignoring, we are put into a room which is obviously intended for you to use the salt shaker gun to take out the massive amount of fodder in here, but we just make use of the shield throw instead, which is also super effective. And once we get it upgraded a little bit more, it's going to have a massive cleaving area where it'll just take out loads of fodder all at once. If we had that upgrade already, we probably could have cleared this room in like 3 or 4 shield throws instead of however many I had to do here. Then there's just a couple of heavies to clean it up, and overall this fight isn't too bad. A little later in the level, we go into this room, which ends up being a trap, and we get spammed by a bunch of Hell Knights. However, these guys are not too bad for the challenge, since like I said earlier, their melee attacks are always parryable, so we get a ton of melee charges out of this fight, just by parrying attacks whenever we're low. So just because of that, Hell Knights are actually kind of a helpful enemy in the run, because they keep our only source of damage nice and fueled up. That being said, early on in the game, I still wasn't really that good with the shield, but as I got farther into the game, I got quite a bit better at using the shield, just because I had to use it so much, since we were entirely relying on our abilities, and not using our guns at all, obviously. And at the start of this fight, right after we get the Impaler, I accidentally shoot my gun at an enemy, and so I have to take a reload checkpoint. It's pretty easy to accidentally shoot just because you can't unbind your shoot key, because you need it in order to do a shield bash. So with that L out of the way, nothing else really too interesting happens for the rest of the level, until we get to the next upgrade station where we can afford the extended edge perk for our shield, which is what I've been teasing about taking out the flotters super effectively. This is another huge step towards our offensive capabilities, especially as we get farther into the game and the game throws more and more enemies at you. And now, as we're ready to finish off this level, we're introduced to the boss variant of the Vagary. These are the giant spider enemies, and this one proves to be kind of difficult, but they actually fall over if you literally just parry their attacks and nothing else, so they end up being not too bad. That being said, they're almost impossible to hit melee attacks on because they just recover from their staggers too quickly, and you have to do a super far lunge to get to them. Another big issue is their little poison cloud thing. Since that actually goes through your shield, it's one of the few sources of damage in the game that can't just be nullified by using the shield. So this fight ends up taking me quite a while to clear, but it didn't give me too hard of a time just because he telegraphs his attacks and gives you plenty of time to react to what's going to happen. But boss fights in general end up taking a really long time because you're obviously expected to shoot them. But yeah, with this guy taken care of, we're ready to move on now. So now we're on to the first dragon level, and right away we are stuck at this wall that requires you to shoot it down. So I had to do that, and then I also had to do all of the required combat with the dragon, which does technically involve shooting the dragon's guns, but just like the mech before, it's the dragon shooting them, not me, right? So we'll just skip to when the actual combat and stuff happens on this level, because there's some on foot sections as well. And we go ahead and pick up the next shield upgrades that we can afford. So now the shield recovers faster when it breaks, and we also get a damage buff to our shield bash if we've killed enemies with it earlier. Overall, some very helpful effects, especially with the shield bash, since I can throw the shield through zombies and then go into a shield bash on an enemy, and now it'll do some actual damage. For now though, that's all we can afford, so let's move on to the next fun part. And here we are introduced to what I believe is called the Battle Knight. This is basically a roided up Hell Knight that also has a bunch of metal armor, which makes him even tankier and harder to kill. And throughout the run, metal armor kind of becomes a pain point because the flail just isn't a viable weapon for us. But at this point, we don't even have access to it, so we just have to take out the metal armor manually. Either way, with the number of parries we get, we're able to do a lot of melee combos on him, but I really wasn't ready for his attacks at first, and it ended up getting the best of me, making us take our first death of the run. His armor was so tanky, dude. But next time, we got it done, and this ended up actually being a really challenging fight. It took a really long time, and he needed several full melee combos to take down, and on top of that, there weren't any fodder demons to build up our health on if we got low, so we just had to make it through. Anyway, the rest of the level wasn't very interesting, so I went ahead and moved on to the last part of the level, and here you see the minigun guy that has the metal shield giving me a super hard time. I don't really have an effective way of taking him down, so I just have to whittle down his shield until I can pop it with the throw. That being said, I decided to take a break and deal with some fodders since I'm low health. In here, you can see how powerful the shield throwing upgrade is for getting your health back whenever you're low, because it kills all the enemies while you're low health, making them all drop health at the same time. But when I go to do this, I realized I could just run past that annoying shield guy, and with that, we're ready to finish the level. And moving into the next level, we're very quickly given access to the Flail, which is our next melee weapon. Unfortunately, the Flail doesn't end up being very useful for us in this run, simply because it is not designed for what we need it to be for. The Flail basically fits in as the splash weapon type for melees, whereas the Power Fist does single target damage, and the mace just kind of does both really well, but has a really bad cooldown. We'll use the mace later in the game, especially once we have it upgraded, but for the most part, we're going to be sticking with the Power Fist. You'll see me trying to use it some in the footage, but it's pretty obvious that the Flail does significantly less damage than the Power Fist on single enemies. The reason that we don't need Splash already is because we have our shield upgraded, and that already takes care of all the fodder demons that Splash would be useful for. Once we make it outside, we have another one of the large scale fights out here, and this is just more of the same stuff, except like I said, I decided to try and make use of the Flail. But after doing a full combo on like the Mancubus for example, and finding out that it just doesn't kill him, I pretty quickly decided to just take it off. Another thing I learned later on in the level is to make use of the barrels, especially next to the Mancubuses. Since you can throw your shield at them, you can safely explode the barrels, and that's a great way to take care of enemies when you don't have access to guns, because the barrels actually do a ton of damage in this game. Eventually though, we make it to this fight, and it gives me quite a hard time. This is one of the first cyber demons of the run, and it's my first time trying to fight him with the Flail, so I have it figured out still that it doesn't do very much damage, so I just beat my head against this wall for an inordinate amount of time. Even after getting him this time though, this fight ends up being a really hard one, and it ends up killing me quite a few times. I still don't understand how this guy got me though. I was clearly blocking and he just hit me right through it. Or this guy killing me with his area of effect that I didn't know was an area of effect. But eventually, and with him taken down, we're ready to continue the level. So after this, we're able to make our way to an upgrade station, and at this point I start upgrading the punch melee, which I honestly should have done sooner because the melee upgrades for the punch make it do so much more damage. Either way, we've got another fight, and this is actually supposed to be a small one, but because these Arachnotrons don't have parryable attacks, it takes forever to kill them. But after enough beating my head against the wall, or beating their head against my shield, whatever you want to call it, we're able to finish it off, and it was just an annoying fight, not too hard. And with this done, we're ready to get into the next big fight of the level, which is another leader fight. But this one I ended up having a much easier time with. I think it's because there was no cyber demon in this one, and also the leader boss was not a Mancubus, instead it was one of the Boar Rider types, so he went down with no problem whatsoever. I ended up just memeing on him with my shield here towards the end just to be a funny guy. You'll see I actually tried to blow up a barrel next to him, but he was a little bit too far away. But fortunately, we get the shield bash and finish him off. So this level ended up being pretty hard, but it still hasn't been anything too bad. However, the game has been getting harder the farther we get into it. But that's this level done, and we're ready to move on.
Player, there's a turret in the courtyard you can use to
No! God, please, no! No!
So ignoring the stinky turret section, we're on to the first real combat of the level, which I believe is also the introduction to the Revenant. And man, considering the Revenant was basically a joke in the last two modern games, they are easily one of the worst enemies in this game. They spam out attacks that are extremely hard to dodge because they track you so heavily, and the only time they do parryable attacks is if they go into an invincible state, which on its own is also super annoying. But despite the Revenant being annoying, this fight isn't too bad, and other than the Revenant, it's nothing we haven't already seen.
Get down, Mr. President!
Moving from there, we had another fight with the Cyber Demon, but he's starting to get easier now because I have the Power Gauntlet fully upgraded now. And I hadn't quite figured out how to use it properly yet, so I was still making mistakes here. But once I started doing it properly, we could actually take these guys down with just 2 full combos of the melee. So they end up being not too bad, especially since they're kind of easy to parry on all their attacks. You mostly just want to be careful of their ranged attack, which is way scarier than their melees, because not only does it just do a ton of damage to you super quickly, it also covers your screen in those bullet effects that are super annoying. And I guess I ended up messing up the execution for this guy because I didn't kill him here. I don't really understand what just happened there. It's like I staggered him out of the glory kill state or something. Whatever, either way, he still is going to go down pretty quickly now because he's low on health. And there we go. But the fight's not done when we kill him, because then another boss enemy spawns with a health upgrade. And this time he's a Battle Knight. And the last time we ran into one of these guys as a boss, they kind of whooped my ass. So let's see what happens this time. So that went a whole lot better than I expected, especially since there was like 3 other Hell Knights there messing with me the whole time too. Either way, with this fight taken on, we're ready to move on to the next level. And at the start of the level, we're tasked with getting the yellow keycard, which of course is going to have its own series of hurdles to get to. And at some point they started adding in this invisible variant of the big ass imp, is I guess what I'll call it. And they throw out these electric walls that actually block all of our projectiles, so they're pretty annoying to deal with. However, this fight doesn't have too much going on, so it's not that big of a deal here. I do kind of struggle a little bit because I can't shield bash them and I don't have any melee charges, so literally all I can do is throw my shield and wait for melees, so I'm going to do that for a while. And as we're trying to leave, we are introduced to the Whiplash, which just like in Eternal, these guys are fucking awful. They also have the extra special really cool property that nothing else in the entire game has, which is that parrying their attacks doesn't restore your melee charges for some reason. So they end up just being a massive pain point in the run because I can't get my melee charges off of them quickly like literally every other enemy in the game just about. So yeah, I hope you enjoy watching this because there's a lot of it. Well, that took forever. I'm sure that won't be a recurring theme literally every time they show up ever. Bitch. So we finally got the key and can move on farther into the level. And in the next fight, right at the start, we have a very close call. Like I said earlier in the run, because we're not really able to use the Flail for the most part because it's just not a good weapon for this, these shield guys end up being super annoying. Fortunately though, we built up our melee combos on the Revenant here, and we're actually able to use another hit on this shield guy, which got him superheated and let us take out the crowd. Eventually though, I ran up on these 2 guys, and they ended up getting the best of me. And you'll see that I have a life sigil, but I chose not to use it. I realized after the fight with the boss spider that probably was going to make the game a little bit too easy if I was actually using them. So I ended up deciding not to use them unless I really needed to. And of course this time I accidentally shot my gun, just trying to do a shield bash, so I had to reset right away. And this fight was seriously kicking my ass. It was a hard one. Fortunately, once we get through this level, we're actually going to get a new tool for our arsenal, so this is basically the hardest point in the game for the current set of equipment that we have now. But with enough tries, I was able to get through the fight, but man was there a lot of close calls in it. A lot of close calls. But on our way there, we ran into this guy, and he kind of acts like the marauder of this game because he has a shield whenever you're away from him, so you basically want to get him to drop the shield, that way you can do damage to him. Though in our case, it didn't matter since our only way of doing damage was melees anyway. Also, I guess I put on the Flail here for some reason, I'm not entirely sure why. But you'll see after I land a few more hits with it on him, I go straight back to the Power Fist because it is way better for this kind of situation. And with this guy taken care of, we can move into the forge level. And here at the start of the level, we are outside the forge, and we have to go and press some buttons to open it up. And of course, there's a bunch of enemies in our way of doing that. Most of the fights here are just small, spread out fights, so nothing ends up giving me too hard of a time. Although I think it was at this point that I learned that the vagary spider dudes just kind of fall over if you keep parrying their attacks. You don't really need to do any melees on them or anything. And honestly, whenever you try to go for melees, they typically will just hit you with their own melee attack, and it'll absolutely mess you up. Another thing I noticed is that you can kind of just ignore them as long as you have other enemies that are more pressing, like the Hell Knights, to deal with, because their projectiles move super slowly and they're very easy to dodge. But with the Hell Knight down, we can finish off this fella, and I'm just going to cut to when we're inside the forge because nothing too interesting really happened here. And once we were ready to enter, one of these guys showed up again, but considering we just fought a boss version of him, this guy was basically nothing, so we took him down in short order. And now that we're into the forge, we've just picked up our first shield rune. And this one isn't amazing, basically all it does is stagger the enemies around me whenever I do a parry, but it is better than nothing at least, so that's pretty cool. Later on though, we'll get parries that actually give us damage whenever we do parries, and that's super nice for this run. And to introduce us to our new parry effects, we're actually given a pretty big boss battle. We have a leader and several large demons that show up throughout the fight, but thanks to the new parry effect giving me a lot of stun, it doesn't end up giving me too much trouble. So let's dive into the fight. And into the next level, we are on a fight which expects us to use the just given to us rocket launcher, but obviously we're not going to be doing that, but there is a pretty high density of enemies here, so the shield bash ends up being pretty helpful for that. And of course, our new rune is also getting some decent splash damage in as well. And while we're here, I decided to upgrade the Fisher rune upgrade for some reason. And yeah, this was a waste of money. There was no point in doing this. I definitely should have just been saving my gold for the turret upgrade that I was going to take later. So after progressing some more in the mission, we're given another leader fight, but this one isn't very hard, and I ended up getting it on the first try, although the fights do take a really long time without using guns. But with this guy taken care of, we can keep pushing farther into the level, but at this stage of the game, there's not a lot of new things being introduced to us, since we've already unlocked most of the demons. But with this armor upgrade in hand, we can keep moving on. So at the other leader fight, which there's 2 of in this level before you get to finish it, we had another one that didn't give me too many problems. At this point, the energy shield guys are no issue because of it bouncing between them, and it actually gives us some decent damage because the shield bounces around and damages everything around them. On top of that, with the fully upgraded power fist and a fairly upgraded rune in our kit, we're actually pretty powerful now. That being said, any of the bullet spam enemies are still pretty scary, and since there's an invincible cyber demon sitting in the back trying to snipe at us, it can be a little bit scary. But I managed to get through this one without dying too. And yeah, with that level done, we're on to the next, where we have a mech. And you know what that means. So once we're done there, we're actually given the best rune in the game, but I didn't know this at the time. This is the Ethereal Blades rune, and it is actually so good. It does a ridiculous amount of damage in a huge area in front of you, but I didn't think it was any good, although I hadn't actually tried it at this time, and I was holding out to get the shoulder-mounted minigun, which is the next rune in the mission after this. But that was not my best idea, because later on I tried the daggers, and they are crazy. So if you're decided to do anything like this, or even just playing the game normally, I highly recommend the blades. They're actually amazing. So pretty quickly into this level, we're faced with a cyber demon, but with all the upgrades we have now, they are not very hard to take on. I mean, this is almost just as fast as killing them with guns anyway. I might just do this in normal playthroughs after this. One melee combo gets him into the second phase, and then another full combo after will finish him off. Of course, I break it up by doing some parries here, but I actually learned later that if you just do those extra attacks, it actually staggers them again every time. So with him down, we can keep pushing in farther into the level. And a little bit later, we end up in this room where there is an absolutely massive fight. We have a bunch of waves of big enemies, and at the end we have another upgrade boss. So I think you know what that means. And this actually ended up finishing off the level, so this was a very short level. So coming into this level, I spared you guys the part where we walk around and stand in elevators for several minutes, and we're on to the first fight, which is a really big mobbing section pretty much. Mobbing is a little bit boring to watch with this build because there tends to just be a whole lot of waiting and stacking health back up, so I'll spare you guys all the details, and we'll just keep pushing through the level. And after that fight, we have another big one to get through before we can get access to the new rune. And this time we do have a mini-boss at the end, but it's just one of those War Rider dudes, and we've already dealt with them like 100 times, so it's not that big of a deal. There are a ton of mobs in this arena, and that's becoming more common in every fight now. We're just getting a really large quantity of enemies, and it does make every fight take quite a long time, so it's a little bit difficult for me to try to edit this down. If you guys are interested, the run did take me about 9 hours to get through, and this was my second ever run, and my first time playing on Ultraviolence. Also, this is actually my second time doing a challenge run video, so I'm very new to it, so I would appreciate if you guys did let me know what you think about it in the comments down below. One thing that I worked super hard on is timing all the music with the stuff going on in the video, and speaking of the music, this soundtrack's about to end, so we're gonna have to do a cut here in just a second. Any minute now, we're almost there. And cut. So now we're here in the room with the new rune, and this is going to give us even more damage whenever we hit a parry on a projectile attack. Basically, whenever we do a parry, it spawns a little shoulder-mounted minigun that automatically shoots for us, which lets us do some extra damage to the demons whenever we're hitting parries, which is super nice because it's basically just passive damage. Although, like I said earlier, the Blades rune is literally just better for this in every way, so just run that instead. But you'll see me using this for the rest of the run instead, because I'm a dumb idiot head. And now we're given our first chance to try out the new rune, and it actually ends up doing some pretty good damage. We still have to get upgrades for it, so it's going to be better later on, but even right now, it's just a nice little form of chip damage that can reduce the number of melees we need to take down some enemies. Anyway, this fight isn't actually all that hard, I'm just showing you it because it's the first time we're using the turret. I was actually kind of surprised by this because on my first playthrough, I thought that the lightning surge ones or the stun ones were the best and that the damage wouldn't be any good. But yeah, the damage is actually surprisingly good on the blades and the minigun. So I definitely recommend giving them a fair chance if you guys haven't already. So with this taken care of, we move on to the next upgrade station we can with quite a bit of gold saved up so that we can grab all of the upgrades for the turret that we can. And we do end up a little bit short, but I'll be able to get that finished off in the next level, no problem. And this one ends up being a dragon level, so we're going to be going through this one pretty quickly. And there isn't really anything too interesting about this level. We're kind of just going around to various hotspots, landing, killing the guys, and moving on, and it's pretty much the same thing as the earlier dragon level as well. These kind of do just feel like filler in the game, and if we removed all of the mech and dragon levels, the game wouldn't be a whole lot longer in missions than Eternal or 2016 was, which is kind of a funny thought to think about. Although some of the missions are a lot longer than in those games, so it'd still definitely be a longer game, even without all the filler. So yeah, a whole lot of nothing later, and we're ready to move on to the next level yet again. And now it's time for us to revive the old one. Ooh. Who did the writing in this game? But yeah, this level ends up not being a very long one, especially since a lot of it is just aimlessly flying around with the dragon, but there is a pretty major disappointment in this one. We'll see it when we get there. But before we can do that, we have to fight this weird-ass turkey. And of course you guys know what that means. Well, that felt good. And now we're ready to move on, and we have just picked up the BFC, and wait, something's wrong. No, not like this. The camera's locked, and it won't let us go until we shoot the BFG. And as far as I know, there's no way around this. You just have to shoot it once. Fortunately, we're not hitting any actual enemies, we're just waking this guy up, so hopefully that doesn't invalidate the run for you guys. Either way, of course, we're gonna keep going, and there's actually a much bigger problem at hand here. And that is the question of how the fuck do we kill all these guys? You were very obviously intended to use the BFG for this fight, but without that, we're doomed from the start. Pretty much from the moment we spawn in, we're just spammed with a completely solid wall of projectiles that we just can't avoid. I tried a bunch of things here, including going for parries and letting the turret get some work in, using the splash on the shield bash, but no matter what I did, I just couldn't dent it enough to make any progress. Eventually, I even tried using the Flail for the splash, and also the fact that it would give me back a ton of armor because I upgraded it. And this got me a little bit farther, but it still just wasn't enough to keep me alive through this onslaught. And this was on Ultra Violence. Imagine how bad this would have been on Nightmare difficulty. But just like every other run, this one ended in failure as well. But I couldn't keep dying forever. Eventually, if I bashed my head against this wall, I'd be able to make some progress. And that finally happened. The first thing I did was use the shield throw to take out the fodder as soon as I could before the electric waves started coming. This would allow me to reduce the amount of projectiles coming at me right off the start. From there, I had to land a parry on one of the green projectiles and hope that I didn't get my shield broken before I could hit one. And once I did that, I would go in for mace swings to make use of the splash. Doing this would get me a huge amount of armor for every swing, which is what I was using to stay alive for most of this. This is one of the only situations where the mace was any good, and it's literally just because there's so many demons bunched up here. It would have been amazing if we had the mace here, but unfortunately we don't get that at this stage of the game. Then from that point, I had to spend nearly 15 minutes whittling this fight down. Easily the longest fight I've ever done in Doom, where they normally only take a couple of minutes at most. And a single mistake would end that run and lose all that progress. And as I was getting towards the end of this wave, something happened. I died, and this was heartbreaking in the moment. I didn't want to have to reset again. So I used a life sigil here, because I knew that this fight could go on forever if I didn't, and that this was going to be my only opportunity to get it done. I didn't feel good about it, but this fight was the only time I used extra lives to get through it. After another really long time, I finally cleared out the demons, and we were ready to move on. That was until I saw this. What I just made it through was only the first half. Okay, it was a little bit less than half, but you have to respect the dramatic tension. The fight was finally done, but it did cost me another life sigil. But regardless, with that done, we were finally ready to finish off this mission, easily the hardest of the entire game.
We have no choice.
And the next mission starts us off right in the action, where we're fighting this creature from Stranger Things. He's pretty much just another version of the Cyber Demon, but he has more health, and instead of shooting, he has harder to parry attacks. But other than that, he's not too bad to deal with. You can see I'm kind of just whooping his ass, but he does have quite a bit of health, and that makes him take a little bit of effort to take down, but it's still not that bad. And while you do have to parry 3 hits instead of 2 to get a stun on him, and you have to do 3 melee combos instead of just 2 to take him down like the Cyber Demon, eventually we are able to take him down in this fight, especially since there's nothing else shooting at me while I'm doing it. And once we make it out of there, we finally find the mace, the last melee weapon. And I don't fully realize the power of the mace when I first get it, and I end up just continuing to use the power glove pretty quickly. But later on, I get all the upgrades for the mace, and it actually becomes our main weapon in the last few levels. But for now, the cooldown is too long to really be able to use it effectively, considering it's our only form of real damage other than parrying projectiles and using the turret. Either way, I have some fun with it here in the tutorial arena, and it does do a ton of burst damage, being able to one-shot most enemies, even mancubuses. And in the next arena, I smack the shit out of this Cacodemon, Demon, which feels so good after the BFG fight. Then from there, we're faced by one of these spider dudes, and at this point these guys are basically nothing to me. All you have to do is parry a few of their attacks, and now that we also have the turret on top of that, these guys just fall over absolutely. But of course this fight isn't over, bringing us a boss variant of the Marauder enemy in this game. And he does end up giving me a little bit of trouble, but of course I'm still trying to get used to using the mace at this point, so I end up just messing up all my timings and taking some damage eventually. But I can see that the mace's stagger is super good, but I'm not sure how good the damage yet is at this point, because I'll have to see how many hits it takes to take this dude down. And I actually just noticed this in the editing, but it looks like I actually get the melee hit off here while not using the melee because I got disrupted. So that's a pretty cool thing, and I never end up really being able to make good use of this throughout the run, or at least not intentionally. But considering how hard it is to get charges for the mace, this is absolutely wonderful. And something absolutely hilarious about this game happens where I just get absolutely yeeted off the map by parrying an attack. But fortunately you don't take any damage from that, so we're able to charge back in and get back into the fight. You can see I'm still not quite used to parrying these guys' attacks perfectly. They tend to delay a lot of their attacks, and that throws me off quite a bit. But with a few more good parries and some breaks to get some health, we're able to land the final hit on this guy, which is also the last big part of the level. And moving on to this level, I feel like this entire level is just kind of filler. But we do have a fight here at the start, which is a little bit interesting, and I'm still using the mace at this point. The only real problem I'm having with the mace right now is just the cooldown. It's obviously the best melee weapon for DPS, because it basically just does the damage of the final hit of the melee combo with the glove, but it does it right away. On top of that, it also has a giant splash area, so anytime there's bunched up heavies, it'll just kill them all at once with one swing, which is super nice. Either way, this fight didn't end up being too much of a problem. I just had to waste a little bit of time because I didn't have enough melee charges to take out this last guy. But now we can go ahead and push deeper into the level. Oh yeah, and if you guys didn't recognize it, this is the level we did our intro clip on. A little bit farther into the level, and we run into this silly little fella. Just like the last boss, except this time he's a boss, so he has a lot more health. And I decided to switch off of the mace and back to the punch halfway through this fight, so we can actually see a direct comparison of the damage. You can see the mace does a huge chunk really quickly, but the only real problem is its lack of fast cooldown. But you can see here with the punch, as long as we have the fully upgraded 4-hit combo, it'll actually do pretty similar damage to the amount that the mace swing did. The only difference being that the cooldown is much faster because you get back a charge as well as charge cooldown rate every time you parry an attack, and the enemies like this do 2 or 3 attacks before you get the stun in that opens you up to do the melee attack. So with the fist back on, we're ready to finish this guy off and continue the level. And we find our way to a Sentinel Shrine where we grab the first upgrade for the mace. This is actually super nice because it means that if we're low health especially, we'll get a massive health bomb whenever we blow up any enemies with the mace, which is super nice. We can't afford any more upgrades for now, but we'll definitely be getting them later. Anyway, once we progress a little bit farther, we put together this freaky little thing. Like, what actually is this thing? I don't understand this part of the story at all. Either way, once we grab it, we have one more fight to do before we can finish off the level. And it ends with us just taking on this Baron, and we'll just take him down with a full combo from our punch, which is going to finish the level. And coming into this mission, we're met with another leader fight, so we have to go clear out a bunch of regular guys before we can take down the boss. It was also at this point, I believe, that I started using the shield saw more to take on Revenants, just because fuck Revenants, that's why. And I'm not sure what exactly happened, but I rocked this guy's fucking world once I got his shield down. It was crazy. It looks like I got multiple of the 4th hit swings in the combo somehow, and I'm not entirely sure what caused it, but I'll take it. Once we get to this area, we have to do a fight with 2 spider dudes at the same time, and that is actually the only time in the game you have to do that. It's still not really that bad, because these guys aren't much of a problem anymore, but I thought it was an interesting thing to point out. But now that we have access to the auto turret, we do a ton of damage even far away from them, because at least it seems like they take extra damage from parries or something like that, because they normally seem like they have a lot of health if you're just shooting them, but if you just parry like 5 or 6 attacks, they tend to just fall down right away. But with them taken care of, we're good to finish off this level and move on to the next one. And in the next level, we got eated by the old one. Ooh. So now we have to pull a Gears of War 2 on him, and doing that will take us to the big bad and let us finish off the game. The level starts with a pretty big fight in this area, but unfortunately I accidentally shoot an enemy during this fight and have to do a reset. But in the next try, we're able to make it through by finishing off the boss of the arena, which is this annoying witch lady who I don't think I've talked about in the video yet, but basically they just like to put up invincibility shields that you just have to wait to make go away. So they're pretty annoying, but fortunately most of their attacks are pretty easy to avoid, so they're not the worst enemy out there. And after we finish that fight, we make our way to a sentinel shrine, and we're finally able to afford the last upgrades for the mace. So now we have an increased splash radius, and the ability to get 2 mace hits if we do a parry. This makes the mace significantly more powerful since the one major downside of the mace is obviously its uptime. So with that, the mace is going to be our main weapon for most of the run now. And here's my first time using the fully upgraded mace against a Cosmic Baron here, and as you can see, we were able to get the free swing off, but then I kind of messed up and went for a second swing, which you just don't have time for. But with a second whack of the mace after parrying some attacks, he goes down in just 2 mace swings, which is really nice. And a little bit later in the level, we crawl our way out of the old one. Ooh, oh god damn it, I tapped the mic. And once we're outside, we have to fight one of these dudes, and now we get to use the fully powered up mace on him. So let's see how that goes. Okay, how about a cyber demon? So yeah, that's the fully upgraded mace, everyone. We'll be using it for most of the rest of the run, but we do have one instance where I decide to use the power fist instead, and you'll see it once we get there. But with that fight finished, we're free to move on to the next mission. And this mission is pretty cool because we're introduced to the Berserk power-up, which gives us some movement speed and a ton of damage, so pretty much even our shield bashes do decent damage against most enemies. And the mace just one-shots damn near everything now. So I'm trying to bunch up the enemies the best I can and get some splash in with the mace, which takes out everything here super fast. And oh my god, just smacking these snakes and just one-hitting them all at once feels so good now. Even the fully armored Battle Knight, Berserk even makes the auto turret on our parry almost kill this Battle Knight instantly, which is absolutely crazy. And of course, they can't withstand the power of the mace either. So yeah, this room was a fun power trip, and before we leave this area, we're going to have a little bit of a boss fight, but it's not going to be very much of a boss fight, considering the Berserk effect increasing our damage. So we just have to get some parries to stun this fella, and then we're going to absolutely smack his shit with the mace, and he goes down in a single hit. And a little bit farther into the level, we have to fight one of these guys, and then another turkey as a boss.
Nothing personal, kid.
But you didn't think that was it, did you? We get another Berserk arena here, and I smack so many Hell Knights at the same time using the mace here. You can see I'm waiting to use it until I bunch them up, and then I get that huge multi-kill. And this arena is super nice because the Hell Knights like to spam parryable attacks at you, and you get your melees back super quick here. So obviously this was no problem, and we just had some more fun bopping everybody with the mace. And we have one more big fight left in this level before it's done, making this one of the longer levels in the game for sure. This one wasn't too bad though, and we were able to get through it pretty quickly, leaving us able to, you guessed it, move on to the next mission. At this point, we're in the end game now, and the game's throwing everything it has at us. So this part of the video is probably going to have a little bit less commentary because everything that needs explaining has already been explained at this point, and we just have to get through the rest of the game with the tools at our disposal. That being said, this is also the part that has some of the most satisfying gameplay because we have the fully upgraded mace and we're making full use of it. So let's montage our way through this level. So now we're aboard the Fat Man's ship, and we're ready for our first real boss fight of the game. And that is, of course, this big-ass floating ball. And this fight ended up taking me quite a while to get through because, well... So yeah, this is going to be a long fight. And this is pretty much how the rest of the game goes. We just have 2 more missions that are both mostly boss fights after this, so... Anyway, this guy didn't really give me a whole lot of trouble, it was just very slow to kill him. And a much more exciting boss fight comes up after him, so we're going to go through this one pretty quickly. So here's us taking him out of the first phase, and then we move into the second phase, which is a little bit harder, but still not really that bad. But he does reveal his immense size, and it makes Doomguy really angry because Doomguy is trying to be the fattest man in the universe in this game. At least that's my headcanon explanation for why we lost literally all of our movement from Eternal. But cornered and desperate, the Creedmaker decides to rip off his shirt and show off his massive girth. And we just can't have that here. So, most of this fight is similar to the last one, but now he puts up these giant walls and does more parryable attacks. But unfortunately, these parryable attacks happen while he's shielded, so he just spends more time being invincible, and it ends up just making the fight take even longer. So, I'll go ahead and show you guys how it went for me. Most of the attacks from this guy were kind of boring to me just because they were really easy to dodge and super slow moving, although of course using higher game speed would have made it more interesting. I just don't like the way the game feels like that, mostly because of the way jumping feels and all that. But now we've taken him down, and while I do have a lot of complaints about this game, one thing I love is just the brutality of Doomguy in the cutscenes. Like, this is the kind of thing you just never see in any sort of media. They always just like cut to a black screen before it happens and just leave like the sound effect or something. But not in this guy. Doomguy just goes kind of nuts.
I can take you to her.
Serves him right for being fatter than me. R.I.P. Bozo, Jabba the Hutt. And in the next mission, they really break up these boss fights by giving us a super fun, very cool and interesting mech section. Except this time I have to watch out because this mech actually has a gun attached to the... And since we control shooting it, I decide not to use it for the entire mech section, but it really doesn't make it any harder. Basically, anytime I accidentally trigger the gun, I just flick my camera away. And other than that, I'm just making use of the palm strike thing we've been doing before to get through all the enemies, so there's nothing new or interesting here. So once we get past the mech section, we're immediately thrown into the fight with the super juiced up Azrak. And I start off this fight using the mace, but I decide to switch to the fists later. Although looking back on it, I probably would have been better off just using the mace the whole time. At least if I was able to consistently get the double hits for it using the upgrade. Either way, this boss fight is much more interesting than the last. It's kind of just an arena style fight with the actual boss of the game, which is super cool. I honestly expected that this would have been the best final boss of the game. I think that he should have just died here and the game should have ended when we finished, but we'll have to kill him one more time a little bit later on. Either way, this fight is probably the most epic of the game, and he gave me a little bit of trouble. It took nearly 10 minutes to get that much progress, but I knew I could get through this without using any extra lives, so I decided to do that, especially to make up for what I did in the BFG arena. And I noticed that during this fight, I was getting in a lot of situations where I'd stagger him with the parries, but then I wouldn't have a mace to actually do an attack during that stagger. So even though the mace could do more damage if I was playing perfectly, I decided to eventually put the power fist back on, just so that I could get damage off consistently, and that's what we ended up using to clear the rest of the Azrak fight. While this fight does mess you up pretty easily, you get a ton of ways to get your health back, including infinitely regenerating pickups around the arena. So overall, the fight wasn't actually that hard, but it did take a really long time, which meant that I had to stay focused for an extended period of time, which obviously is a little bit difficult to do. But with enough hits put in, we're finally able to take him down. And of course, by take him down, I mean move on to the second phase of the fight. After all, this is a Doom boss, so of course there's multiple phases.
Hey, Ron. Hey, Billy.
So now we're back in the fight, this time on phase 2, and I guess this guy's a part of Castle Volkihar because he looks kind of like a vampire lord now. But there's not really a whole lot different about this fight. You still just parry 3 of his melees, and then that gives you an opening to use your own melees on him. So I'll let you guys see how it went for me. And now we're on to the third phase of the fight, and the literal only thing different about it now is this like circular section where you have to parry these blood things. Otherwise, it's just the same thing yet again, so I'm kind of running out of ways to edit this in cool ways, so we're just going to do a little time lapse through this. And with one final parry, we're ready to take him down, with what I'd like to call definitely not a glory kill. Very different, very different. Anyway, with this fella taken care of now, we're finally ready to push into the last level of the game and get this challenge finished. And here we are on the real final boss of the game, Punk-ass Azrak, now accompanied by Unnamed Witch. Truly the fight of the century. And with Azrak taken down, I did not complete Doom the Dark Ages with no guns. What, did you forget about this part? Dumbass.